All right, I believe we are officially live. Hello, arty peoples, and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. As you can see, I am here with Jeff Olson again. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Hello, everybody. Great to be back. Hello.
So today's show is JL206, and Jeff has an amazing show prepared for us. I am so excited. It's something that I know we get a lot of questions about, so I hope you guys brought your questions for him because it's going to be an amazing show. But before we officially jump in there and let Jeff take over and talk about all the really awesome art supplies he brought today, I just wanted to say a quick reminder. Art of the Carolinas is happening this year. It's official. That is going to happen November 12th through the 14th. And then that is the dates for the trade show where you get massive discounts on all the different art supplies and the different things that we offer, and you can hands-on demonstrations and you can play with art supplies. It's a lot of fun. And then we also have workshops that start as of the 11th and run through the 14th as well, with all different artists teaching all different media, all different subjects. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm teaching. I'm excited.
Hey.
So if you guys
awesome.
if you guys are interested in checking that out, go to artofthecarolinas.com and make sure you book your hotel rooms and your workshops. Make sure you do it now because they all sell out really fast. So check that out. And Jeff, please take it away. I know we have a lot of stuff to cover.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me, inviting me. And thank you for letting me talk about oil paints today. I was thinking back to all the talks we've done. This is the first one we've done on oil. So this is exciting. I'm going to be talking about Rembrandt oils, which is our tried and true, one of our original product lines. And then I'm also going to be talking about Cobra Water Mixable Solvent-free oil paints. And so I'm excited about that. Like we were saying, this is a category we get tons and tons of questions. I was looking back over some of my notes. It's got to be 2 to 1. I get twice as many questions about Cobra as I do everything else put together. So I'm excited to talk with everybody, share some information with you, hopefully give you some ideas, pique your curiosity about these materials if you haven't tried them before, and then also give you some tips if you are working with them to improve the results. So let's go ahead and get started. I have my presentation as always here. So let's get that set up. And we'll go through that first, and then I do have a demo at the end, and I think you're really going to get a kick out of this demo. It's a very unique setup I'm going to do today, kind of old chemistry. We're going to do some alchemy today. That's what I'm going to say. We're going to do some alchemy. All right, so there we go. Infinite freedom today, Rembrandt and Cobra artist oils. So what do I mean by infinite freedom? What I mean there is that you have a choice today. You can paint traditionally or solvent-free. And most importantly, and that's something I hope to make really clear, is that it does not involve sacrificing quality of materials for the health or the environment, right? So you get a choice here without sacrificing quality. Traditional oils, they offer a unique experience of engaging with a material that's been in the making for over 1,500 years. Water mixable oils utilize a centuries-old technology that enables you to continue to enjoy those same working properties, that same experience, only without the use of solvents. So I'll be talking about that at length today. I'm going to share, like I said, some old alchemy with you, and then also show you what you can do with some of the mediums in the demo. But first, I want to talk a little bit about who Royal Talens are. And here's a picture from the 1930s in the factory and the crew today in Apeldoorn. So we are based in the Netherlands in a little town called Apeldoorn, which is about an hour east by train of Amsterdam. A nice kind of little industrial city hub area, home to the summer palace to the royal family. And we've been manufacturing there since 1899. And Rembrandt oils were one of our first lines. So I'm excited to talk about those today. Other lines that we have, of course, are Cobra, which we'll be sharing today, Amsterdam all acrylics, Van Gogh oils, watercolors. So a whole myriad of product lines underneath the umbrella of Royal Talens. We are called Royal Talens today because, and I don't know if I've shared this with you guys before, we started out as Talens. Matter of fact, it was called the Dutch Factory for Paints, Lacquers, and Inks. But in 1949, Queen Wilhelmina, the monarch at the time, who was an artist herself and a big fan of Talens, gave us that designation of being royal. It's kind of like being the paint makers to the queen. And that started in 1949 for our contributions to Dutch culture and the economy. So it's been since then, since we've been referred to as Royal Talens. Royal Talens in North America was established in 2015. Of course, our products have been available here for many, many years before that, but now we have our own distribution center and customer service center, and that makes it great, especially for all of us in North America who love the products and now have a direct line to communicate with the company that way. A little bit about myself, my big vanity page here. Here I am in my studio where I'm sitting with you today. I am, of course, a working artist for 30 plus years now. I've been teaching art for, more than a decade at university. So studio art courses primarily, some art history. And then I've been in the art materials industry for more than 20 years. Many hats I've worn, everything from the retail side, but of course, education is my passion. And if you'd like to learn more about me, my website's jeffolsonart.com, so you can check it out. All right, so today's agenda. So in the beginning, so I always like to share a little bit of history about the products. I'm going to do that today with oils. What is a binder? So I've talked about this in the context of the other talks we've had, but I'm going to talk specifically about what the oil binders are, and we refer to them as the drying oils. So I'm going to share with you what those are and how they work and their working properties. So what distinguishes them and what distinguishes oil paints. I'm going to talk about grounds because this is really important, especially for oils. You know, with acrylics, you can paint on almost anything. Of course, watercolors on paper, it's pretty self-evident there. But oil paints, there's a little more preparation that's required, or at least an understanding of the preparation so that you have a good painting that's archival, that's going to last a long time. So I'll talk about grounds. I'm going to talk about solvents because that's kind of key to what we're talking about here, whether we're going to be working with traditional oils, which require solvents, or with water mixable oils that don't. Next, we're going to talk about why paint solvent free. So there's different reasons, and these are I'm hearing from all sorts of people, whether they're professional artists or enthusiasts, you know, why they're interested in this. So I'll talk about some of the reasons people are exploring solvent free painting. And then I'm going to talk about those types of paints in comparison to the other types of oil paints that are available. Emulsifiers, this is the secret ingredient that makes it all happen. So I'm excited to share that with you. And then a little bit at the end of the myths and tips, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about water mixable oils. So I'm going to try to dispel as much of that as possible, and also share with you a couple tips about how you can work with them successfully if you've never worked with them before. And then, of course, we have our giveaway quiz at the end. We're going to be giving away some sets. That's right, sets plural. You're going to get a Rembrandt and a Cobra set for the winner of our giveaway quiz. And I'll share more details at the end of the presentation as well. And then, of course, we're going to do the demo after all that. So let's go ahead and jump in. So in the beginning, so a lot of folks think of oil painting as beginning during the Renaissance, and it actually goes back much further. We actually recently, in recent history, 2001, there were discovered these beautiful murals that were painted in caves. It was in the Bamiyan region of Afghanistan where they were discovered. And all these beautiful murals, they're Buddhist murals, were painted with a paint that was an oil paint. It had a walnut and poppy seed binder. The pigments were mixed directly that, and it was applied to the walls. It was done in such a way that leads you to believe that this was not the first time, right? This had been a tradition that had been building. So it wouldn't surprise me if we come across even older examples. These dated to the 7th century. So that, you know, turns it on its head, this whole idea of oil painting being something that was invented during the Renaissance. Actually, a much longer history, much richer history than we originally were led to believe. But then, of course, we do get to the Renaissance in the West, and this is where we really see an explosion where oil painting becomes the dominant medium with artists. One of the most well-known and thought of as the father of oil painting in the Renaissance is Van Eyck. Here is a picture. It's called Man in the Red Turban. It's thought to be a self-portrait. We don't know for sure, but he really perfected the oil painting technique in a way that created it as the mainstay for artists from that point on. It's a glazing technique. It's something we could talk about all on its own, right? But this is where we really see the dominance of oil painting coming through. Prior to that, we had tempera painting. Tempera is where you mix the pigment directly into egg yolk, and that's going to be important later on in our conversation. So the pigments were mixed into the egg yolk and it was applied onto a surface. It wasn't just overnight that we see the development of oil painting. There was actually a period where they would paint the underpainting in tempera and then finish with oils. But oils just really became more popular for a lot of reasons. A desire to paint imagery in a more naturalistic way. It was part of the Renaissance philosophy at that time, a real interest in nature. The working time, oil paints stay open or they take longer to dry, so it enabled them to rework it, for tempera dried more quickly, fresco dried more quickly. The intense color with oil paints, you could put more pigment in them, and we'll talk about that later as well. So a lot of reasons why oil paint came to dominate art making in the West beginning in the 15th century. And this is something that doesn't get talked a lot about in art history classes, but really was a revolution for oil painting, and that was the invention of the paint tube. So this gentleman here is John Rand. He's an American. He was an expat in England and invented the paint tube in 1841. And it's really credited with an explosion in terms of the demographic who used oil paint and how oil paint was used. A lot of people attribute the invention of the tube to the Impressionist movement. You know, they were painting on plein air. Here's a fun example of painting over on the boardwalk on the East Coast back in the early 20th century. But the Impressionists utilized these tubes. We have lists from post-Impressionists like Van Gogh, who talks about ordering tubes of paint, enabled them to go out into the field and paint more easily and get colors more easily. Prior to this, you had to mix your own paints in the studio. They would store them in what was commonly used then was a pig's bladder, not the most convenient tool or material to carry paint around in. So the tube paint really made it more convenient to go outside of the studio and paint. And it opened it up to a lot of enthusiasts too. It wasn't just professional artists now seeking out the paint. So it was easier for the general public to use it. And we see a real explosion in the interest in oil painting as a activity in general. So we can thank John Rand for that and the development of oil painting and its popularity also. All right, so let's talk about the binders. So I mentioned this in earlier presentations, that a binder is what really gives character to a material. So the pigments we use are the same in acrylic, are the same in watercolor, are the same in oil. So those are the coloring agents. But the binders are different, and that's what gives each different medium its character. And a binder has two main responsibilities in the material. One is suspension. So pigments don't dissolve into the material. They actually hold their solidity, so that they have like what you would think of as sand or pepper mixed in water. You can stir them up, they will disperse, but eventually they'll sink down to the bottom. So you need a material that when you stir it up, suspends it in place. Next, we need it to adhere. It needs to be a good adhesive to glue it or stick it to the surface of whatever we're painting on. So those two things are primary in the role of a binder in paint. You could add to that they create a paint film that then protects the pigments over time, but not all binders do that. For example, gum arabic for watercolor doesn't create a discernible paint film. It actually is absorbed into the paper surface. So not all binders do that. But they all do have in common the suspension and adhesion of the pigment to the surface. And in the background here, you can see these fun images. This is obviously an oil, but these are flax seeds. And flax seeds are the source of linseed oil, which is one of the drying oils that's used as binders for oil paints. So linseed oil is by far the most popular of the drying oils. The drying oils are those that we consider or will create or harden as they dry to a surface or create a paint film. Not all oils will do that. For example, mineral oil, which is used in oil pastels, never really dries or creates a discernible film. So not all oils have these characteristics. These are some that do, and these are some that have been used over the centuries in oil painting. Linseed oil, the seeds that we saw earlier, pressed from the seeds of the flax plant, pressed into this wonderful amber oil. It is slow drying. as we know, but it's actually relatively fast drying compared to the other drying oils. So that's one thing that's made it really popular. It has the strongest paint film, so it hardens to a stronger and sturdier result than some of the other oils. One downfall with linseed oil is that it does yellow over time. Now, depending on the color you're using, you may not see this effect for many, many years, but you might see it in whites, especially if you're adding a lot of mediums that have linseed oil into the paint. So that's something to keep in mind. Linseed does yellow over time. Walnut oil is also a fast drying oil. It's non-yellowing. It was actually the preferred binder during the Renaissance before linseed became dominant. And it's still used today in the manufacture of some paints, and it's a real popular medium and used often as a solvent in place of spirits. So it's a great way to clean your brushes and maintain your work area in the absence of traditional solvents. Can't be used for everything that a solvent used for, but it is a nice replacement for some. So walnut oil, of course, comes from walnuts. You can see the fun picture here. And it's been around for a long time, has good endurance, not as strong as linseed oil, but still very good binder for oil paint. Safflower oil is another non-yellowing oil, so an advantage there. It's slower drying than linseed or walnut, so it takes a little longer to dry. It's very commonly found in whites today. A lot of manufacturers, including Royal Talens, use it in the manufacture of some of our whites because it's non-yellowing. That way those colors won't change or alter over time. But you'll also notice that those paints can take a little bit longer to dry. Some of that is the pigment absorption, but it's also the inclusion of safflower oil, a little slower drying than linseed oil, but non-yellowing, not quite as durable of a paint film, but when it's mixed with linseed oil, it works out just fine. And then we have poppy seed that I listed here. Of course, it comes from poppy seeds. It's a great non-yellowing binder. It's used in a lot of whites. It's used in a lot of varnishes. And again, as I gave you that example, those images from Afghanistan from the 7th century, it's been around for a long, long time as a binder for pigments. It's a little slower drying, much like safflower oil, and a little less durable paint film than linseed as a result. So those are the drying oils that you'll most commonly come across as binders for paint or in auxiliaries that we can use as mediums. So those are the drying oils. Next, we have the working properties. So it's the binder that gives us the working properties for the material. So what are the specific working properties of these binders and of oils as a result? So the drying time is probably something that you're most familiar with. Oil paints take a long time to dry, some colors more than others. Maybe in 2 to 3 days, they can become tacky and you can paint over them. Maybe in a couple weeks, they're dry enough that you could actually touch them and oil doesn't come off the surface. But depending on how thick you put on the paint and how fat the paint is, how the oil content is or how much oil is in it, that drying time to completion can be anywhere between 6 to 9 months. And that's often given as a date that you need to wait before you can varnish a painting because you need to let the paint dry completely. And oil paint dries in a very unique way compared to other binders. Instead of evaporating moisture like acrylics or watercolors, where the moisture evaporates out and leaves us the paint film with acrylics, oils actually oxidize. They're absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere, and that's a much slower chemical process. And also a little more complex chemical process. And that's one of the reasons we have to paint or layer oils in certain ways when we're adding mediums to them. A whole other conversation, a whole other topic that maybe we can explore at another time. But oxidation is the drying process for oils, and that's what allows oils to stay open for a longer period of time to work and blend, taking weeks, if not months, to dry completely. Pigmentation. Oils have a great absorption into pigments, meaning that oil paints often have a lot more pigment in it than they would, or than a comparable professional tool in another medium like acrylics, for example. So you could have two professional quality, one oil, one acrylic. The oil is going to have more pigment, more color. One of the reasons oil painters are so passionate about their materials, just a lot more color than you would find in other types of paints. Another benefit for working in oils is there's no mass shift. And what I mean there is there's no shrinkage. So if you brush on or use a palette knife to put in a nice impasto layer of painting, nice thick layer, that brush stroke, that mark with the palette knife remains after it dries. It doesn't shrink, it doesn't go away. You'll notice with acrylics that sometimes and it depends on the type of acrylic, of course, but those will level out sometimes. You lose some of the intricacies of the mark that you make with the brush or the palette knife. We call that mass shift. So there's no mass shift in oils. Now you can change that by adding certain mediums, but the paint out of the tube, you're going to have that result. Color shift, another advantage for oils here is that there's no change in the color in the paint during the drying process. So that paint that you put on wet, like this beautiful red that's in the image here, as it dries over time, it will retain that same color. Acrylics, for example, will actually darken as they dry. Gouache can darken and lighten depending on the value of the color that you're using. So that's something that you have to get used to and accommodate for. But oil paints do not change. There's no color shift with them. Another reason a lot of painters actually find it easier to work with oils than other mediums when they're mixing and matching colors. And then finally, solvents. Traditional oils do require a solvent. And those solvents I'm going to talk about later include turpentine, white spirits, odorless mineral spirits, are used often to make the paint leaner, to clean our brushes, to use in making varnishes. So they're really important to the process, and I'll share that with you. And that'll be a nice segue into getting into the solvent-free paints. So solvents for traditional oils are required. Solvents for other types of paints, like acrylic and watercolors, water is the solvent. So a lot more convenient there for sure. But solvents used properly and using good studio practice can be safe to use. But for some folks, it's just not a choice. For whatever the reason, maybe it's a sensitivity or an allergy, those are just not an option. So we do have solvent-free painting now, and I'm excited to share some information about that with you today. All right, so grounds. Before we jump into some of that, I wanted to talk about the grounds because this is really important, and there's an important note, and you'll see it here. Water mixable oils should not be used on an oil primed surface. So let me back up to the beginning, and this will kind of explain why that's important. So the ground is the layer that physically separates your paint, your oil paint, from the canvas underneath. Here you can see a really fun linen canvas. Doesn't matter what the material is, cotton duct or linen, even wood panels, you want to protect them from the oil itself because the linseed oil can be corrosive to those materials over time. So we need to protect that surface using a ground. So how do you prepare your ground? Preparing your ground and doing it properly protects the support from the oils. It provides a better surface for the adhesion of the oil to the painting. So that's something that's important about properly preparing. And it also allows the paint to dry correctly. A lot of the problems that artists come to me with can be traced back to ground preparation. So it wasn't anything in the materials they're using or even how they were using the materials. It was the ground of the surface that they were working on that was causing the problems. That's why it's so important. You can use a lot of different types of surfaces. I mentioned canvas and wood panels as examples. There are types of paper today that are sized for oil painting. I'm going to actually be working on one today. So there are a lot of different surfaces. As long as you prepare the ground properly, you can use those to your benefit. So traditionally, how that preparation begins is with sizing. So what is sizing? Traditional methods include using or sizing a surface with an animal glue, like rabbit skin glue. It's something that's still available today. And that was prepared and coated onto the surface. The sizing not only protects the surface from the oil paint, but it also tightens up or sizes the canvas to be painted on. So it's a protection as well as providing good tension. Today we have PVA or polyvinyl acetate. We offer a great tool in our Amsterdam line, and it's acrylic binder can be used for sizing. So a lot of different materials available to the artist today. One of the things I like about the new sizes is that they're more resistant to moisture. over time. So they're actually probably a little more archival than using rabbit skin glue. Although I will say that rabbit skin glue for you hardcore folks out there, it does tighten up the canvas in a way that really can't be done or can't be achieved with PVA. It just is that susceptibility to moisture over time that you have to be weary of. So that's the sizing. So that's the preparation of the surface to protect it. Next, in a traditional process, you would add the gesso. So gesso is a term commonly used for the layer after sizing. It's an Italian word for plaster. There's some great recipes available for homemade gesso. They date all the way back to the 15th century. One of my favorites is from Cennino Cennini. He has a book that you can still get on Amazon called Il Libro degli Arte. And he has how to make paints, how to mix gessos, about everything you'd ever want to know if you were in the medieval studio, early Renaissance studio of Cennino Cennini. But he's got some great recipes there. And they often are a combination of things. Some are an animal glue, like the rabbit skin glue, mixed with a type of chalk or white pigment or both. Sometimes it's oil itself, so that linseed oil binder mixed with chalk as an extender and pigment, and then put on top of the sizing coat. And now this is what gives us the layer where the paint can adhere to and get its hooks into, if you will. So it prepares the surface for the paint itself. So our sizing protects the surface and the gesso prepares it to accept the paint. Both of these done properly also help with the drying of the paint, because the oil paint doesn't only dry on the surface of the painting, it also dries from behind. Today we have, and this is a picture example, a modern gesso, which has an acrylic polymer resin as a binder. It can be used in the absence of sizing. So you don't need to size a canvas first. You can do it directly with modern gessos. I recommend 2 to 3 coats at least when you're preparing for an oil painting. There are different recipes for different types of gesso. The Talens gesso pictured here, it's a 2 to 1 all the way up to a 4 to 1 recipe, and you do that in layers. That way you get a really well-prepared surface and a great ground for accepting oil paint over time. So those are just some brief comments on grounds. Again, that's something else we could talk about. Maybe we'll have to do a demo on preparing your surface. But just wanted to make sure I included this in, because it is important as we go to painting with solvent-free water mixable oil paints. And back to my statement here again, water mixable oils should not be used on an oil primed surface. And that's because if you're using water in the mixture, if you're using water to thin your paint, you can't paint on a traditionally oil primed surface because it contains oil. That means what you're putting on will not adhere to the surface and it won't dry properly. So if you're going to be using water mixable oils, you should use a universally primed or an acrylic primed canvas or one that you pre-purchased that has that type of preparation on it. You want to stay away from oil primed canvases or boards when using water mixable paints. All right, solvents. So these are traditional solvents used in oil painting. The most traditional is probably the gum spirits of turpentine. A solvent, I should define it, it's something literally that dissolves the binder. So when you mix turpentine or white spirits in with an oil paint, it actually breaks the binder down on a chemical level. So that's an important distinction than what happens in water mixable oils with an emulsifier, and I'll talk about that as we move forward. But that's one interpretation of the solvent. Another interpretation or definition is how it's used. Often oils, and I mentioned walnut oil early, can be used as a solvent. So how a material is used can define it as well as what its properties are. These particular solvents here are the most commonly found in the use of oil paints today. Turpentine's been around for years. Turpentine is the only solvent in painting that can be used with Damar, which is a type of resin that's used in glazing and varnishes. But it is very hazardous. So if you're using turpentine or you have an interest in using turpentine because you want to do some techniques with Damar, make sure you have proper ventilation. Just a couple of the long list of things that turpentine can cause. Its vapor can irritate the skin and eyes. It can damage the lungs and the respiratory system, as well as the central nervous system when inhaled. So just breathing in the fumes, you don't even have to get it on your skin or into your body directly. Just breathing in the fumes can cause a lot of health problems with turpentine. So if you're using that, please make sure you have proper ventilation, maybe even wear a ventilator in that use. There are alternatives, thankfully. White spirits is commonly used for thinning oil colors when painting, as well as cleaning up. It's a very pure solvent that evaporates completely from the paint film, which is nice. It's used to make your oil paint leaner, putting down those or layouting your composition, for example, your values, your lean layer of paint. It's very suitable for removing varnishes. White spirits is excellent for that and is often used by restorers, removing varnishes from older paintings. So a lot of benefits to white spirits. Most commonly used today, because of some of the health issues that I mentioned with turpentine, are odorless mineral spirits. So these can be substituted for turpentine in all painting functions that don't include Damar. It's a great alternative for thinning your paint. It's great for cleanup. It still requires adequate ventilation. This is something a lot of folks don't know. Just because it's odorless mineral spirits doesn't mean it doesn't have vapors that are harmful to your health. It's less toxic, but still requires good ventilation in your studio. It's not going to give you the health problems that turpentine will, but it's still something that needs to be respected in its use. They're slower evaporating than turpentine. That's something to keep in mind. White spirits and terps evaporate a little bit quicker. So odorless mineral spirits not quite as quickly, although I would think for most people it wouldn't be as discernible as it would be for people who've been painting with spirits or terps for a long time. So those are the basic solvents you'll find in working with oil paints today. So then the question is, why paint solvent-free? Why do I want to avoid those solvents? So I mentioned before, I think the number one reason folks come to me about wanting to explore solvent-free options is their health. Either they have developed health issues painting with traditional materials or solvents over time, or they have a pre-existing condition where those solvents exacerbate it. Or they just have developed a sensitivity to it. So there are health reasons, probably the biggest. Second is the environment. There's disposal of solvents, and depending on where you live, it can be more complicated to dispose of those particular materials. So the environment is a concern. You don't just pour your solvents down the drain, for example. And then convenience. A lot of plein air painters that I work with, they're traveling to different destinations. You can't carry solvents on the airplane, for example, or wherever you end up in terms of your destination, those things aren't available. So not having to rely on solvents can be very convenient. So those are just some of the reasons why people are interested in painting solvent-free. All right, types of oil paint. So this is important as we get into water mixable oils. Those are my puppies up there. I apologize, live TV, what can I do? Right, so types of oil paint. So traditional, which we've been talking about. Traditional oils are those that are used with a binder made of the traditional drying oils, primarily linseed oil that we talked about today. Alkyd resin is another type of oil paint. There are some types of paint that are still made with this binder. Alkyds are very interesting. They have a combination of natural oil and polymerized alcohol and acids. They were actually invented by General Electric in the 1920s to coat wires, but it was eventually discovered to be a great binder for paints. A lot of painters were really excited about the original alkyds because they're fast drying. Today, many auxiliaries or mediums include a type of alkyd in them, and they're really something that people like to use because of the ability to speed up the drying time of the oil paints. That's the primary reason for using an alkyd. They're also very popular in glazing techniques, so different things you'll see there with alkyds, but they are also a type of binder that's used in the manufacture of certain lines of paint. And then finally, water miscible oils. There are different types out there. But the type of we're going to be talking about today, Cobra specifically, the binder is the same as with a traditional oil paint. So linseed oil is the binder for Cobra, has not been altered. It is the exact same binder we use in our Rembrandt paints. All that's been changed, the linseed oil hasn't been modified itself. We've added another drying oil, a soy oil, which I'll talk about here, that acts as an emulsifier. And what is an emulsifier, you may ask? Well, let's talk about emulsifier. So an emulsifier on a molecular level has a hydrophilic head, which is water-loving, literally in Greek, that's what that means, and an oil-loving tail, lipophilic. So you can see in the diagram here we got these little emulsifiers with their water-loving head and their oil-loving tail. And we have this droplet of oil that's in the water, and the emulsifier connects itself to the oil droplet and binds it with the water. It's a very common chemistry. You find it a lot in food products, for example, that keep things like salad dressings from separating in the bottle. So these emulsifiers are added into those food products to keep the ingredients from separating. That's all that's been done here. There's been an emulsifier added to the binder so that it will accept water. And this is very different chemistry than what happens with a solvent, right? Remember I mentioned how solvent breaks down the binder, breaks down the linseed oil. Here, the oil does not get broken down. It just gets adhered with this third element, this emulsifier, holding the oil and water in together. So it does behave a little bit differently as a result, and I'm going to show you some of those working properties in the demo. So that's what an emulsifier is. So what are the different types of emulsifiers? Emulsifiers have actually been used in painting for centuries. Go back even farther than the use of oils. Some common binders in painting that contain emulsifiers are egg yolk, which is used for tempera, and milk, which is used for casein. So there's two examples of emulsifiers that were used as the primary binders and artist materials for centuries. Traditional egg tempera consists of a dry pigment, an egg yolk, and water. The egg yolk acts as the emulsifier to create a vehicle for the binder that allows the paint or allows for the paint to be mixed with water. So very unique quality. The ingredient that's in that egg yolk that makes that possible is called lecithin. Lecithin is a very common occurring element in nature. We actually have lecithin in our bodies. It's in many plants and animals. Including milk and including this guy here, and those are soybeans and soy oil. Soy oil produces a very pale, soft, and slow-drying oil film. It's actually a drying oil. It's obtained from soybeans, and it's really only recently become popular as a paint binder when you compare it to traditional drying oils, mainly in the 20th century. But we found that mixing it with a traditional oil like linseed allows for us to add water to the combination. So it's actually a very old chemistry, renewed for a different purpose. Right? So allowing water to be mixed in with the oil paint. All right. So some myths and tips about the paints themselves before we get into the demo. So myths about water miscible oils. Water miscible oils contain water themselves. Absolutely false. So what's in the tube is oil paint, linseed oil, pigment, and the additional emulsifiers added, but absolutely no water in the tube to begin with. That's something you add later on your own. Water miscible oils are not a true oil paint. This is false. They're absolutely a true oil paint. The addition of the emulsifier does not change that at all. Matter of fact, it's another drying oil, as we discussed. Water miscible oils dry faster than traditional oils. This is also false. You'll find the same working properties in terms of drying time. They dry through the same process, oxidation, as a traditional oil. So you can experience or enjoy that same long open time, allowing you to blend your colors. Water miscible oils work like acrylics. That's also false. They are an oil paint by all definitions, and the working properties are those of an oil paint. They won't work like acrylics do. They don't dry quickly like acrylics. They don't have mass shift or color shift like we discussed, like acrylics do. Cannot be mixed with traditional oils. This is false. You can mix Cobra with any traditional oil. Absolutely no problem there. They work together really well. Cobra can be used with any traditional mediums. Also, it just depends on how much you add to those, whether or not it retains its water miscibility. Can be mixed with acrylics. This is false. You can paint over acrylics with an oil paint, but you can't mix the two together. They dry just very differently. You may be able to paint with them successfully, but the reason we don't recommend it is we're not sure exactly what's going to happen as the two paints dry over time. You could see some problems with the ground. You could see shrinkage, peeling, all sorts of potential problems there just because oils and acrylics do not dry in the same way. Are not archival. That's false. So these paints are as archival as the next. The chemistry is proven. They are very archival. You're not going to see any problems down the road with the integrity of Cobra paints because of the addition of the emulsifier. Have less pigment. This is also false. There's lots of color. We have two grades of Cobra, Cobra Artist, Cobra Study. Cobra Artist, which we're talking about today, has the same pigment loads as almost any other equivalently artist grade paint would have. All right, a few tips about working with water miscible oils. When you're using mediums, moderation is the best. So one of the biggest problems I run into with folks, he's just not going to give up the ghost up there, is he? One of the most common things is using too much medium too quickly. So I always recommend using moderation first. And I'm going to give you an example in the demo, just adding a little bit to your brush in the beginning, becoming comfortable with how it feels on the surface, and then increasing the amount of medium as you would prefer going from there. So in the beginning, moderation is best. You can combine Cobra oils with traditional oils. We established that. But if you maintain a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts Cobra, 1 part Rembrandt, for example, the paint will maintain its water miscibility. So you can integrate your traditional oils with Cobra over time and make them all water miscible. This is really a great feature, especially folks who are thinking about trying Cobra for the first time. You don't have to throw all your other oil paints out. You can actually slowly integrate them together into your painting and not have to use any solvents. And then finally, it's not recommended to exceed a 1-to-1 ratio of paint with water to maintain the paint film integrity. So this is really true with solvents too. Anytime you get beyond this 1-to-1 ratio water with the Cobra paints, you dilute the binder to the point that it's not going to create a solid paint film. Now, there are ways to create a lean layer of paint to get around this. If you really like a super lean, you can mix a medium with the paint first to thin it out and then add water to it because the medium fattens the paint up a little bit, makes for a stronger paint film, and then you can thin that out and get some really wonderful lean washes underneath if that's something that you want to explore. But I'm happy to answer any questions about mixing water with the paint when we get to that period of the conversation today. So not recommended to exceed 1-to-1 ratio paint to water. All right, so why Cobra? I save this for last. I get asked this a lot. Where does the name come from? So if you're familiar with Royal Talens products at all, you'll know that we have our tradition of using the names of well-known Dutch artists or Dutch heritage in our product lines. Rembrandt, perfect example. Van Gogh, another perfect example. And Cobra is no exception. Cobra was a European avant-garde movement in the late 40s, early 50s. It included Carol Apple. He's this dapper guy here in this plaid jacket. I love that jacket. Love this mustache. He was a Dutch painter who was part of the Cobra movement. When we look at the name Cobra, these are the initials for the cities where these artists were from. CO is Copenhagen, BR is Brussels, and A is Amsterdam. So this is a name that they created for themselves in their group called Cobra. It was a revolutionary movement. It was inspired by surrealism and automatism. They were turning away from tradition in many ways. And I love this quote from Carol Apple: "We do not want to be understood, we want to be freed." And it was this idea of freedom that drew us to wanting to name Cobra paint after them. In this case, though, the freedom from solvents, the infinite freedom to be able to paint without the use of solvents in your process. So that's the history. That's where the name Cobra comes from. No Cobra snakes in the Netherlands that I'm aware of. All right, here's our quiz. So to be eligible to win, you want to put your answer into the chat, and then a winner will be selected from the correct answers posted after the show, and we'll get in touch with the winner directly and let you know. And the prize is going to be a set of Rembrandt and a set of Cobra paints for you to explore. So here's the question. I'll leave it up for a little bit, and then after the end of the Q&A, I'll go back and post it again for those who might have missed it. All right, here we go. Here's the question. Cobra oils can be mixed with Rembrandt oils. What ratio Cobra to Rembrandt must be used to maintain water miscibility? So what ratio Cobra to traditional oil must be used to maintain water miscibility? That's our question. I'll leave that for a second. Jot down your answers in the chat, and we'll pick a winner from one of the correct answers. All right. That is the presentation. Any quick questions out there before we get to the demo?
Yes, and I actually just wanted to kind of jump in there because I know I can see everyone's comments coming in. They're all very excited about
What
that.
fires did I light out there? What fires did I light?
Yep, it's coming in. So I did have a couple questions throughout your presentation. Some of them had to do with the water mixable oils. Some of them had to do with the different things that you were covering. So I wanted to touch base on a couple of them
Sure.
just so we can kind of jump in. One of the best questions I saw on there was the emulsifiers. Do any of those yellow over time?
So soy oil is not a yellowing oil. It's more akin to something like safflower or poppy seed, for example. So linseed is by far going to be the oil that yellows the most over time. And that's the most commonly used oil. It's the binder for most oil paints. It's the oil that you'll find in most mediums available to artists today. And the yellowing is going to happen to different degrees, right? It isn't something that most of us are going to see in the next 5 to 10 years in our paintings, possibly in the whites. And it really increases as we add more mediums to the paint. So if you're painting really fat, you're adding a lot of painting medium into your oil and creating glazes, for example, those are going to be susceptible to yellowing more so than just paint right out of the tube over time. There are some things too that you should know about linseed oil in terms of yellowing or darkening. It's actually light sensitive. And people who've worked in art museums know this, or galleries, or anywhere where paintings are stored out of the light. So a painting in the vault, for example, at the Met, after being there for months or years, when you pull it out, it's very dark. The oil out of the light darkens, but exposed to the sunlight again, or to the daylight, for even a few hours, but a few days, that completely lightens back up and we get the original luster to the painting again. So linseed oil is light sensitive. And this has come up before where somebody has a painting and it's been sitting in a dark corner of their studio, their house, and all of a sudden it's very dark looking. And they're like, what happened to my painting? Oh my gosh, it got completely dark. It really was where it was at in the studio or in the home, and it's exposure to light that does that. So linseed oil is sensitive to light.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I know I have actually have a bottle of linseed oil that I had tucked in the back of my supply cabinet, and I forgot about it. And then I was, cleaning out things, and I realized that I still had it, and it was so dark. And I just stuck it in my window, and within I think it was like maybe 2 days, it was lightened right back up, which is fantastic.
I used to get that question all the time when I worked in the stores. You'd see the bottles on the shelf, and some of them would be dark and some of them would be light. The ones that were dark were usually ones that were just unpacked out of a box and put on the shelf. The ones that were lighter had been sitting there for a while. So it is interesting that happens. Chemistry, it's amazing.
Science. Okay, so other questions that we did have, do alkyd paints yellow over time?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure on the answer to that. I have not experienced that. I've never encountered that as a problem that somebody's come to me with. I certainly do some homework. To the best of my knowledge, alkyds do not yellow. It's really the character of the linseed oil that I'm familiar with and the yellowing aspect of it, but that'd be certainly something to look into. I'll check that out. But as far as I know, alkyds themselves, the alkyd resin does not yellow, but some mediums have a combination of alkyd resins and linseed in them. So those mediums could be susceptible to yellowing over time. So that's something to think about too when you're looking at an alkyd medium.
Makes sense. Okay, now the other questions we did have were on, so grounds, when you were covering the grounds, like the gesso and the sizing and everything. If you buy a pre-gessoed canvas, do you need to worry about the sizing at all?
A quality pre-gessoed canvas, you should not have to worry about that. Those have been prepared in a way to make them suitable for oil painting, acrylic painting, whatever you want to use them. There are some economy canvases sometimes that only put a coat or two on it. So, if you're buying an economy canvas, I would always recommend putting a coating of gesso over the top if you're going to be using oil paints. But most good quality pre-stretched, pre-primed canvases, whether you got canvas on the roll or like I said, pre-stretched, they're going to be fine to work directly on. I know people though who just out of practice, their regular practice, they always put another layer of gesso over the top, just so they know that it's definitely going to be safe.
Yeah, I have a couple friends that do the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of doing that as well, do you need to use any kind of a ground on an aluminum panel?
The other reason for using a ground is adhesion.
Mm-hmm.
So a ground on aluminum panel is going to be beneficial to helping the oil paint adhere to the surface. So I would recommend it. Is it required? I don't think that the oil paint is going to corrode or eat away at the aluminum like it does canvas or a wood panel. But I think for successful painting and enjoying the experience, it would be a good idea to put a ground on it.
Yeah. I do know that we have an aluminum panel that we actually sell. It's not Aluma. Is it Aluma Comp? I'll have to have moderators put it in the chat. But it's the name of it's escaping me, but I do know you can actually paint directly onto the surface and it doesn't have any issues with the
nice.
corrosion or anything, but it is very different from painting onto a canvas, whereas a canvas is going to grab that paint. The aluminum
there's no
is
tooth.
very slick, and it can come right back off. But once it actually does cure and adhere to the surface, it's really on there. So it's kind of the weirdest surface ever that I've painted on, but it's really fun.
There are so many surfaces. I was at the Getty and was getting a tour by one of the docent curators there, and they were showing me paintings that were done on copper. Of course, Rembrandt used to paint on copper plates. They have a painting in their collection that's painted on limestone. It's a giant slab of limestone where the oil was painted directly onto the limestone. So artists have used a lot of different surfaces, sometimes not very successful. Leonardo, of course, is famous for his failed mixtures of materials. So artists have tried a lot of different things, but a good ground will make a lot of surfaces viable for oil paint.
All right, now I did see one other really good question come in, and I know we have other questions that we've definitely missed.
Sure.
And if we do miss answering your questions while we're live on the show, Jeff and I will both be going through all the questions and all the chats that have been going on live, and we make sure to go back and answer you guys. So if we don't actually talk about it here on the show, because we are limited to time, we will make sure to get an answer for you. But the one that I did just get is, do you have to use specifically a water-soluble oil as a medium for your water-soluble oil paints, or is it okay to use something like a walnut or a linseed oil?
Sure. So kind of a two-part answer to that. One, you can use those mediums with the paint, absolutely. The second caveat is, do you want it to remain water miscible? If so, then you have to use it sparingly, and you'll have to experiment, because with every medium, the ratio is a little bit different. So that ratio of 2 to 1 I used earlier, so 2 parts Cobra, 1 part traditional oil to maintain its water miscibility. That's also the case with mediums. It isn't exactly that ratio, so you have to find that with each different medium, but you can add them in small amounts and maintain the water miscibility. But there is a tipping point. And some people would say, well, why would I want to even do that? There are some techniques that can only be achieved with certain types of mediums. And there are some people who paint with Cobra who don't add any water into the painting itself. You can paint with the paint straight out of the tube in Pasto. It's wonderful, and use the mediums and never touch the paint with water except when you're cleaning up. That's the only time they were using the solvents to begin with. So sometimes it becomes, it's out of the equation, the water part of it. But if you're going to be using water to thin your paint, to make it more lean, to mix colors with, then you have to be cautious about adding other mediums to it.
Now, is there a way of being able to tell that tipping point, like whether or not you've officially lost the water miscibility?
I'll show you in the demo. There is. You'll see. You'll see what happens when good emulsification happens, and what happens when there's no emulsification.
Awesome. Well, I think as far as the questions that are specifically about the things that we were covering, I think we're good for right now. I know there's going to be more at the end of this, but we better get into the demo. Or
let's get into the demo. Yeah. I'll get through this. I'll kind of take a couple shortcuts, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to see
I'm
at least
sure.
the mixing of these together.
We'll be happy
All right.
to have you as long as you'll stay with us. So let me switch
Absolutely.
the view so you guys can see all of what's going on.
Perfect. Perfect. Everybody see my table okay? All right. Excellent. So what do I got here? I've got some Rembrandt. I've got a cad orange. Love this color. A couple things on the tube. Here's our light fast symbol. These 3 plus signs mean excellent light fast rating. That's the best or highest light fast rating you can get. This little square here, completely black, means this paint is completely opaque. If it were just a square empty, a white square, it would be a transparent color. There's also semi-transparent and semi-opaque. This is our proprietary color number. 211 is the color number for cad orange. Whether you're working with Rembrandt or Cobra or even in acrylic, that's the same number you would find. You've got the series number down there. This is a series 4 color. You'll also see on the back the color index number for this particular paint. Same is true for the Cobra. This one, of course, has my trusty tube ringer attached, but color name the same, light fast rating, opaque, the same color number there, and some of the same information on the back of the tube. I also, if I have time, I was going to show you what you can do with some of the mediums, but what I mainly want to show you today is how you can mix these 2 paints together and maintain the water solubility. And yes, that's exactly what it looks like. That's an egg. And we're going to be using some egg yolk that I already prepared here to show you how an emulsifier can be used to create a water miscible paint out of traditional oil paint. Crazy stuff today, crazy science. All right. First things first, let's go ahead and put a bead of this paint down. Code up there agrees, like, yes, put the paint out. Then I'm going to put some Cobra down next, down here. All right. So I'm just going to spread a little bit around with the palette knife just so we can see how that is. Same thing here. All right. So I have a bucket of water and I have my brush. And I'm going to dip right into the water and I'm going to go into this Rembrandt paint. And one thing you're going to see, I'm going to hold this up closer, what happens with the water. You see that? See it bead up on the top there? There's actually no mixture. Oil and water do not mix. That water just stays on top. I can actually make it drop off. I was able to smear the paint around with the brush, right? But there's no mixing of the water into the paint. All right, so let's go ahead and get some water again. Now let's go into the Cobra. So right away, you'll see there's kind of a slight color shift. That tells you that the emulsification process is working. The emulsifier is activating and it's bonding the oil with the water. That linseed oil that's in there is bonding. And now we're getting a nice lean layer of paint that we're mixing here with the combination of the water and the Cobra. And I'll hold that up a little bit closer so you can see how those have thoroughly mixed. All right. So now what about mixing both together? So let's go ahead and put a little bit of Cobra, or excuse me, Rembrandt out. And now I'm going to put twice as much Cobra. Remember, 2 to 1. So there's our 1 part Rembrandt. Oh, got a little. There we go. So twice as much of the Cobra. Now I'm going to mix that together thoroughly. So 1 part Rembrandt, 2 parts Cobra. You can see the paint's mixed just fine, no problem. There's no water in the paint to begin with. You're working with two true oil paints. All right, now here's the test. Can we mix water into it? So I've got my water again, got my brush, and let's see what happens. So you can see that emulsification process begin again. So there's enough emulsifier in the paint that it allows you to add a traditional oil to it in the mix and still maintain water miscibility. So I'll show that up close and you can see how they mixed. No beating water, just a nice lean layer of paint there. Remember back what happened here? You can still see the water just sitting on top. So you can mix these paints together. So that's great news. And just for fun, I had mentioned that the same emulsifier, that lecithin, that naturally occurs in a lot of organic materials, occurs in the soy beans that are used for the oil in the Cobra, but it also is part of egg yolk and used in tempera painting. You can actually add egg to oil paint. There was a recent discovery, some Bellini paintings, when they analyzed them, they found that he had mixed the egg yolk directly with the oil paint. It's also said that Rembrandt used this as a technique to create more impasto. It's a technique that was called guazzo, where you would layer. I mentioned that earlier, so the two have been used together, but you can actually add in some to your traditional oil. Remember, this is my Rembrandt oil up here, resisting the water. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of the egg yolk to it and see if we can change its working properties to accept water. All right. So you'll see one thing it does that's fun. It makes it a much more fluid mixture.
Now, is there any specific ratio of egg yolk to traditional oil that you need to mix together?
There are, I should say there are varying ratios. There's not like one set. It actually varies from color to color. Every color has a different oil. Matter of fact, I may have overdone it here in this one. I'm going to add a little more oil paint back into it, actually. So yeah, every pigment has a...
What are you specifically looking for when you mix them together?
So what I want to show today is not so much how you can make your own paint as just how emulsifiers work to let you allow water to be used. So here we go. So you're kind of getting the impasto feel to it, a different kind of a texture from the paint by adding the egg yolk in. But the egg yolk is also an emulsifier, so we will be able to add some water into this paint. Oh, there we go. I'm getting a better consistency. There we go. So there's the Rembrandt paint mixed with some egg yolk. Now let's see if we can mix some water in it. There we go. See that same color shift that happened with the Cobra when we add the water? So instead of the water beating up, the egg yolk here is acting as an emulsifier between it and the oil paint, allowing the paint to be mixed. Cool. Kind of see that there too. So the color's mixed and we get that nice lean layer of color. You'll notice the color shift that happens as the water goes in when I was mixing these, but notice here too how it went away. Let's get my brush out of the way of it. So when we first added the water, it turned lighter, and that was the activation of the emulsifier. But as the paint rests, that goes away and you don't have any more color shift. So that's a question I used to get a lot too. Oh, when I add water, the color changes. It's a brief chemical reaction and it goes away in a matter of minutes. So there we got Rembrandt mixed with egg yolk, making it water miscible. Here was the Cobra mixed with water. And then here we put 1 part Rembrandt, 2 parts Cobra, and it made the Rembrandt water miscible, and we were able to add water to this mixture of paint. How are we doing on time?
We're pretty good. We're on time. It's okay. That's it. But we can absolutely do a little bit more if you want to show us some more things.
It's up to you. I can, or we can just answer questions.
I know I do have a couple questions.
Why don't you shoot as I go? I'll go ahead and you fire the questions.
Here, let me do this, because in order to hear me, I have to keep myself off of mute. And if I talk, you guys are just going to see me. So I'll switch the view to where everyone can see both.
Okay,
right,
perfect.
So with the egg mixture into that, when you actually do mix it and it changes that color, even though it shifts back to the original color, that was still wet, right?
Yeah, it was still wet. So it happens while the paint is still wet. So
That's
you
awesome.
won't see any color shift in the drying.
It's just that initial chemical reaction.
Just that initial chemical reaction, exactly. So I'll do it again here. So what I've got is some Cobra in each one of these, and I'm going to show you the difference of mixing Cobra with water, and then the Cobra painting medium, which I have here, and then the Cobra paste to show you how they alter the way the paint releases on the surface.
Very cool. All right, now, will the egg additive or any of the emulsifiers added in, really, will that smell or crackle over time?
Neither. It's always interesting, isn't it? Because we all know that eggs go rotten, right? But egg tempera has been a binder for centuries. There's still egg tempera paintings in the museums that we can go look at around the world. So tempera will not rot as you use it as a paint binder in the painting process. Totally different than when you've got that whole egg that's sitting in that refrigerator or on the counter for days on end. So as a painting binder, there's no concern. I should add a comment, great that you bring that up. Walnut oil is one of the only dry nose that you need to be careful with, because walnut oil will rot. So you really need to refrigerate that over time and watch it. You'll know when it's gone bad because it smells really bad.
Yeah, I've also made the mistake of leaving my walnut oil out.
All right, so I'm mixing water here with the Cobra just to show you how it works on the surface. You can see that I prefer just dipping my brush in water and adding it to the paint that way. You're going to get a much better result than trying to dump a bunch of water, mixing it into a surface like that. So just with water, I'm able to get some nice, good color release. You'll see you start to get the dry brush in the end, but a nice opaque layer here. With the cadmium orange, of course, right? A really beautiful and very opaque color to work with. So that's mixing the paint with a little bit of water. And next, I'm going to use the painting medium. I'm going to pour a little bit in this dish here, and I'm going to do it the same way. Again, moderation is the way to go with these mediums. I'm going to dip my brush into it.
Now, one question I've had on here a couple times actually is, why would you use a water mixable oil with a traditional oil?
I think the biggest reason that people ask me about it is because they have a significant investment in traditional oils and they're thinking about making the change. And then they're like, well, what do I do with all these other oil paints that I have? And that's one of the reasons that it comes up a lot. The answer is you don't have to get rid of those paints. You can integrate them with the Cobra into your process and maintain the water miscibility over time. So one of the real benefits of being able to do that. So I don't know if you noticed as I was working with the painting medium, but the paint spreads over the surface so much more easily with the painting medium. And you can also see a slight change in the gloss that happens. As you add more painting medium to the paint, it makes it glossier. It makes it more transparent, depending on how much you put in there. It also strengthens the paint film, and of course, it makes the paint fatter. The more oil you add into paint, the fatter it gets. So, real important feature when you're layering paints. All right. And then finally, I'm going to do some of the painting paste. This is my favorite. You can just think of it as transparent paint. And I'll put a bunch of it down there because I want to show you something. It does make the paint more transparent, but it really is a great extender. And I want to show you just how quickly it absorbs the pigment. We had equal amounts, right, of the paint and the paste, but we still have a real strong, intense color. So I was able to double the amount of paint I had with the painting paste. And now kind of create, I'm going to use my brush so you get that same look. Created twice as much paint. It also helps the paint release a little bit better. And it's still pretty opaque, right?
Yeah, that's very opaque. It looks great.
So able to really extend the paint. And for palette knife techniques, I really like it too. You know, it's a nice, there we can kind of get some of the underpainting, but holds its peaks really well. So it's a type of medium you can use where you can maintain the integrity of the mass of the paint, create some wonderful textures, certainly for palette knife painting, and extend your paint in the process. So that was just with water, painting medium, and then the painting paste. Kind of hard, I think, on the camera to see the nuances of it.
Okay, let me see if I can switch to view. Let's do that one more time.
Down here.
A little closer to the camera.
So that's with water. And then the painting medium, a little glossier. And then here with the painting paste, a little more transparent because I added so much of it. And then I did just scrape it up too, right? But great texture. All right.
That is cool white, fantastic. Like I need all of those mediums. I like it a lot.
I think it makes all the difference with Cobra. And this is from my own experience too. When I first started painting with it, I went on some plein air excursions with some of our ambassadors and worked with the Cobra exclusively. And just the paint out of the tube with water works well. Mm-hmm. But when you add some painting medium or one of the quick dry mediums, for example, paste is one of my favorites. Then it's like butter. I mean, it just goes on so smooth, so immediate, wonderful. All the prima techniques with them all. And it doesn't take a lot of it. Just dipping your brush into the painting medium, then into the paint, just changes the game. So if you've struggled with Cobra or any other water mixable oils before, didn't like the feel or texture, try one with a medium. It could really change the experience.
It really can. Now I do have a lot of questions that are still rolling in, and I'm sorry guys, I know we're not going to get to all of them, but please put them in the comments. We will absolutely go over them.
I will come back too.
Yes. We are definitely out of time. So we'll make sure we get back to those and write you guys back. So if you have questions, feel free to send them that in the chat, or you can also send them straight to us. Jeff, how can people get in touch with you guys?
So Royal Talens North America on Facebook. Definitely there. info@royaltalens.com or info.na@royaltalens.com is our Q&A board. You can go to our website, royaltalensnorthamerica.com. There's also a spot there to submit questions. You can email me directly as well, and it's j.olson, O-L-S-O-N, @Royal Talens North America. I'm happy to start up a conversation and dialogue with folks too.
That's awesome. Now, if you guys want to ask any questions that are in the chat, or if you have anything specifically for me, you can also get in touch with me. We have our Jerry's Live page on Facebook that is a huge community of artists that we all kind of get together and we support each other. So it's not just me, I think there's like 6,000 people that are all artists and love the arts, and we all ask questions and post things. And if you're not quite sure on something, you can always make a question for everyone to check it out and see how they feel. And in order to get to that Facebook group, it is the Jerry's Live Facebook group, but in order to get in, you do have to answer one question. Otherwise, you are deemed a robot, and Katie will not let you have robots. Otherwise, yeah. Otherwise, you can reach out directly to me. I have my own host page, which is Emmy, host of Jerry's Live, and you can get in touch with me straight there. But that is everything, all the time we have. We're actually 15 minutes over.
I'm sorry.
No, do not apologize. It was awesome. It was such an amazing demo. Thank you so much for joining us again, Jeff. And I'm going to have to get you in the studio one of these days very soon, so we can
absolutely
have all the art shenanigans here. And I can play with the art.
That would be awesome. Looking forward to it
too. But again, guys, this was episode JL206. If you are interested in anything Jeff was using, make sure to go to the website jerrysartorama.com, and in the search bar type in the code JL206, and everything he was using should pop right up in the teacher's cart. That way you can add it to your cart or even check it out for more information. But that was everything all the time we have, and make sure to join me next week because I'm going over art studio organization. Things that we struggle with so bad. I have an art mess and I am trying my best to get organized.
You have a Francis Bacon studio?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a picture of his studio?
It's slowly becoming very, very organized. I'm excited. But I will show you guys all the tips and tricks on organizing your studio. So I hope to see you next week, next Tuesday, same time. We will see you then, okay?
Bye, everybody.